Avatar, Legend of Aang, Book 4, New World, Chapter 1, 6 months after Ozai's defeat. My name is Aang. I am the Avatar, master of all 4 elements, and 6 months ago I stopped Fire Lord Ozai from taking over the world using the Fire Nation and weaponizing Sozin Comet, but I managed to use my Avatar state and cancel out his firebending abilities, and he was put in a prison cell, as well as his daughter Princess Azula, who was taken down by her brother and my firebending teacher Zuko. 6 months had gone by, and me and Katara had returned to the Southern Water Tribe with some of the people from the Northern Water Tribe, and we started to rebuild, replacing the huts of houses, building weapons and helping them with food and rations, farm animals and much more. It was hard work, but it was well needed. Sokka stayed in Ba Sing Se for a little while. Suki and Sokka was going around the world, training new recruits, giving those who cannot bend the chance to defend themselves and their loved ones. Toph was spent some time with her family, but I could tell she wanted to join in on our cause. Zuko was crowned the new Fire Lord, and so he spent many sleepless nights sorting out the Fire Nation. He basically had to rebuild the entire society system plan from scratch. The Fire Nation no longer held a threat, were no longer intimidating or threatening or overruling. The hardest part was convincing the rest of the world of the same. Myself and Katara sat on Appa, and we left the Southern Water Tribe a day before. We had an urgent issue to attend to. Katara placed her hand on mine, and I looked at her and she smiled at me. "What are you thinking about?" Katara asked me. "I don't know. How are we going to convince people that the Fire Nation are no longer a threat? I mean, it took longer than I expected, but now here we are with this dilemma." I sighed. "Hey, don't do that. We've got this," Katara replied. She kissed my cheek, and then Ba Sing Se came into view, and I pulled the reins, and Appa descended slowly. He landed on a large courtyard. Several of the new soldiers stood waiting for us. We both jumped off of Appa, and I stroked my large bison's chin, and then Katara let out a squeal as she ran over to Sokka and Suki. I walked up to them as the brother and sister embraced each other. "Hey, how are you guys doing?" Suki asked me. "We're good. 2 water tribes are thriving on helping each other out, working, and we have trained healers and hunters willing to relocate to the south. Maybe for a little while, maybe for definite, who knows, but it's some real change," I replied. "That's amazing, Aang. Well done." Suki grinned at me. Sokka walked over to me and we hugged. "Hey, Sokka," I grinned. "There's my favourite bald monk with an arrow on his head." Sokka sighed. "I'm the only bald monk with an arrow on his head," I muttered to him. "True," Sokka chuckled. Then Appa roared a slight roar. Sokka then ran over to Appa and dived onto the large bison. "Appa, there's my favourite flying bison," Sokka chirped. Appa then licked Sokka. The brute strength of his tongue lifted Sokka off the ground for a few seconds. We all let out a small laugh. "We have them restrained over here," Suki said, with more serious tone. We followed Suki across the courtyard, and there were 2 young men handcuffed, and the works of the Earthbenders. They were getting into a fight with 2 of the Fire Nation tourists. Ba Sing Se opened its walls to everyone, as it was agreed by all nations now would work together, but these 2 started a fight and we apprehended them, Suki explained. I stood before the 2. They were a little older than us, but we did not allow random acts of violence against the people of the Fire Nation, especially those who did not contribute to Ozai and his war against the world. "You know who I am?" I asked. "Yeah, you're the Avatar," one of them muttered. "I am, and it's not a right to attack innocent people no matter where they come from," I told them. "They aren't innocent, they're goddamn firebenders," the other snapped at me. I bent down to their level and opened my hand, and a small flame burst to life in my palm. "I'm also a firebender." "What am I, a bad guy now as well?" I asked. "No, I guess not," both of them said. "Now we're gonna do things a little different from the leaders of Ba Sing Se, from the Fire Nation, from all the negativity. So I will let you go, but no more attacking people for no reason," I told them. They both nodded at me, and the flame in my palm blew out. I stood up and shifted my foot. Their rock-made handcuffs crumbled into nothing. Then they both climbed to their feet, and we watched them walk away, hanging their heads in shame as they stumbled back into the city, silently beating themselves up. Katara walked up to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I wasn't too harsh, was I?" I asked. "No, it's okay. You did good," Katara replied to me. "Thanks for that. Now on to other business, but first of all, let's get us some food, shall we?" Suki said. "Oh, please, I'm starving. I'm tempted to eat apple." Sokka noted. I let out a small chuckle. Please, if you can knock him over, I'll let you eat him, I snorted. Then we all walked back into the city. Being the Avatar was like being a lord or a king of some kind. Everybody wanted to say hello or hug me, have me sign something. They wanted to show me some of their bending techniques. I was extremely flattered. It did remind me of when I was first out of the ice. It allowed me to be youthful. After talking to some of the kids, being thanked by the crowd for seeing the world and showing off some bending techniques of my own, I went and joined my friends. We sat in a cafe and ate some food. We all started chatting, trading stories, and Katara filled Sokka in on the tribes. He asked about their grandmother. Luckily, she was doing fine. She was thriving with all the extra help. I promise I'll come back with you. I should be home, really, Sokka told his sister. I would love to visit the Southern Water Tribe, Suki chirped. I'm just glad my leg healed, Sokka moaned, flexing his knee. We all laughed, then suddenly a scream echoed outside. We all bolted off of our chairs and Sokka withdrew his sword. Suki pulled out 2 fans from her waist belt and we burst out of the cafe. We saw 3 men stood in their stances. They all had normal clothes on, but their belts were that of the Fire Nation army. And they had the Fire Nation faceplates on as well. A sudden flash of images of fighting the Fire Nation army hit me fast and hard. I snapped out of my imagery and looked at the 3 men. Before them was a young woman and a child. Just because we have lost our Lord does not mean his image of our world does not burn deep within, one of the trio barked. He then stepped forward and threw out a fist. A burst of flame shot from his knuckles. I moved without a second thought. I stomped my foot down and raised my forearm, and the earth moved, creating a wall in front of the mother and child, and the flames hit the wall. The 3 firebenders all turned to me and my friends. Another one spun around, creating a large bolt of fire, and threw it at us. I jumped in front of my team and caught the flames without touching it. Using my firebending abilities to mold the direction of the fire, I spun it around me and then threw it back at the firebender. Sokka and Suki ran at one of the firebenders. Sokka swung his sword and the firebender stepped back and dodged the sword swing. Sokka managed to smack him in the head with the handle of his sword, and Suki jumped up and kneed the man in the face. She then blocked a punch with her fan. Katara opened her pouch of water, and with a few waves of her hand, she bent the water. It moved like it was alive, flowing freely. The water flew at the firebender, it wrapped around his hand. Katara exhaled slowly, and the water froze, becoming solid ice. I jumped up and slammed my foot on the ground. Raising both my fists, I did. The earth under the same firebender burst up into a stubbed point, knocking the firebender into the air. Then I bent down and threw my arm out, blasting the airborne firebender, and he was hit with my air funnel, and he was thrown into a wall. He dropped onto the ground unconscious. I saw Sokka and Suki slam the second bender to the ground, Suki punching the man repeatedly, knocking him out. The third bender threw several random blasts of fire across the street. People started running away in fear, and I was filled with anger and determination. Katara, sort those flames out. Suki, Sokka, get those people to safety, I ordered. Everybody nodded at me, and Katara mouthed the words, I love you, and I mouthed them back. Then I chased after the fleeing firebender. Every now and then he would turn around and throw flames at me. I blew them away with gusts of wind, making sure his reckless attacks didn't harm anyone. I saw him, and it was like in slow motion. He ran through a large puddle of water. I took my chance and focused on the puddle. I spun my hand in circular motion, and then threw my hands up sharply. He then was hit by the puddle as it exploded upward, and then it froze solid into ice, catching the man's feet. He wobbled on the spot. He then stood there trying to pull his leg free of the ice. He started to heat up the ice with his firebending. Before I could do anything, he was hit in the head with a boomerang, knocking him out. I tried to see Sokka as he stood there out of breath, catching his boomerang. It's not my old sword, but gotta keep to the classics, am I right? Sokka muttered. I took in a deep breath and nodded at him. The 3 attackers were arrested and taken by the Ba Sing Se soldiers. I was thanked for my efforts, and I stood there as I watched them, and my mind started to race. What's the matter, Aang? Katara asked me. How are we supposed to convince the world that the Fire Nation are not a threat anymore, if they still act like Ozai? I asked her. Katara sighed, and then she hugged me. She kissed me on my head. I know we can do it, 'cause of you, 'cause your heart and your spirit. Like how you defended those people without a second thought. That is going to convince people to change because you are kind and true. That is what the world needs, Katara told me. I nodded at her. Deep inside, I knew she was right, but I had my doubts. I had to find out what was going on. Night fell and we all got some sleep. The next morning, we all sat up with Appa and ate breakfast, and Suki came running up to us. Those firebenders from yesterday started talking. Turns out there's a cult of some kind, and they believe in the words of the great old Lord Ozai, Suki explained. We need to find them and deal with them now, Katara blurted. We do. If time to call the rest of the team. Get some messenger hawks. We need Toph and Zuko, and whoever else is willing to come back and help us. We need to put a stop to this now, I ordered. Katara looked at me dead in the eye. We knew this would happen eventually, right? She told me. I nodded at her. I would never admit this, but I was done. I wanted to stop the fighting. I wanted to glide over to the Northern Air Temple and be at peace within the clouds. I wanted to ask Katara to come with me, but I knew as the Avatar I had to help the people. And the band of firebenders who were willing to fight in the name of Ozai, that was something huge, a task for the Avatar to take.
What you have just listened to is a product created by the Three Ranger Bros Studio.
Hosted by three cosplaying fathers who
happen to be massive geeks of all sorts of fandoms.
They are Mark, the Red Cornish Ranger,
Cosplay Dude 637,
and Ty Tiger.
The studio covers different types of YouTube videos, TikToks, podcasts, and live streams.
If you wish to find out who cosplays who, the YouTube channels, the TikTok accounts, and the podcasts, and all of the other social media platforms,
please go to the 3rangerbrostudios.com.